Jake Morrison had always believed that the worst part of any job was the paperwork, but 3 weeks into his assignment at Outpost Gamma 7, he was beginning to think the worst part might actually be the complete absence of anyone to complain to about the paperwork. The border station floated in empty space like a forgotten afterthought, monitoring the disputed zone between human and Cathurian territory, with sensors that were older than most of the peace treaties they were supposed to enforce. Jake's official title was Security Analyst, though a more accurate description would have been Professional Observer of Cosmic Lint, given how little actually happened in this sector. Day 21, he recorded in his daily log, staring out at the shattered rim through the observation deck's reinforced viewports. Still no sign of intelligent life, including my own. The shattered rim stretched before him like a graveyard of civilization. Dead systems, broken planets, and debris fields that had once been thriving colonies before the Third Border War turned them into monuments to humanity's talent for creative destruction. 20 years later, millions of Cathurian refugees still drifted through human space, seeking permanent homes while bureaucrats on both sides debated settlement policies with the urgency of geological processes. Jake's job was to monitor refugee traffic, file reports that nobody read, and maintain sensor arrays that tracked ships moving through corridors that officially didn't exist. It was the kind of assignment that either drove people crazy or taught them to appreciate the simple pleasure of being left alone. Tonight, he was leaning toward crazy. Computer, display archived files related to the Meridian incident. The main display flickered to life, showing documents that were mostly classified above his clearance level. What remained was a frustrating collection of redacted reports, incomplete testimony transcripts, and surveillance footage with convenient gaps that made Jake's analytical mind itch with professional curiosity. The Meridian incident, 20 years ago, a peace conference that was supposed to end the refugee crisis permanently. Cathurian Ambassador Thainry was assassinated during negotiations, the peace process collapsed, and somehow a key human witness vanished without explanation, leaving gaps in the historical record that still influenced current policy. Convenient, Jake muttered, scanning through files that raised more questions than they answered. A witness disappears just when his testimony could have prevented decades of diplomatic gridlock. He pulled up surveillance footage from the conference, grainy images of delegates, security personnel, and one brief shot of a young human boy who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. The kid was standing near Ambassador Thainry moments before the shooting, but the camera angle made it impossible to see his face clearly. Jake zoomed in on the boy's image, and something odd happened, a flash of recognition that felt like déjà vu mixed with homesickness. The feeling was so strong it made him dizzy. "That's weird," he said to the empty station. "Kid looks almost familiar." The computer chimed with an incoming proximity alert. Unknown vessel approaching. Configuration suggests light courier class, modified for stealth operations. Jake's amusement evaporated. In 3 weeks of monitoring empty space, this was the first unauthorized contact he'd logged. Either someone was lost, or someone had found exactly what they were looking for. Computer, identify the vessel. Unable to comply, ship is running full-spectrum stealth. Estimated arrival in 14 minutes. Jake sealed the archive files and moved to the station's armory, selecting a standard-issue pulse rifle that he hoped he wouldn't need to use. Border stations were supposed to be neutral territory, but supposed to be had a way of becoming, used to be, very quickly when money or politics were involved. The approaching ship docked with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this before. Jake monitored the airlock through internal sensors, watching as a single figure in dark tactical gear cycled through the entry protocols with knowledge that suggested intimate familiarity with human systems. "Great," he muttered, "professional visitor." The intruder moved through the station's corridors like a ghost, disabling security cameras and motion sensors with tools that definitely weren't available at the local hardware store. Jake tracked their progress through his personal display while positioning himself in the central command center, the one room they'd have to enter if they wanted access to the station's real secrets. He didn't have to wait long. The command center's main hatch slid open with a soft hiss, and Jake found himself facing someone who definitely wasn't what he'd expected. The intruder was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with silver hair pulled back in a functional ponytail and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her ears rose to elegant points that marked her as Cathurian, though her tactical gear and movement patterns suggested military training that transcended species boundaries. "That's far enough," Jake said, keeping his rifle trained on her center mass. "Outpost Gamma 7 is neutral territory under the Geneva Accords. State your business." The woman's weapon, something that looked like it could punch holes through battleship armor, was aimed directly at his head with the steady precision of someone who'd never missed an important shot. "I'm looking for information about the Meridian incident," she said in accented standard. "Specifically, the missing witness who disappeared 20 years ago. A lot of people are interested in ancient history lately. Doesn't give you the right to break into federal facilities. My name is Kira Velshin. My father was Ambassador Thainry." Her voice carried undertones of controlled fury. "Someone murdered him to prevent peace, and someone helped cover it up. I want to know who." Jake felt that odd sense of recognition again, stronger this time. "And you think breaking into my station will give you answers?" "I think," Kira said, her storm-gray eyes focusing on his face with sudden intensity, "that you might be more connected to this than you realize." Their gazes locked, and something extraordinary happened. Jake felt a rush of images that weren't his own. A peace conference, crowds of delegates, a young boy watching from the shadows as a Cathurian ambassador fell to an assassin's weapon. But this time, he could see the boy's face clearly. It was his own face, 20 years younger. "Why do your eyes look familiar?" Kira whispered, her weapon wavering as she experienced the same rush of shared memory. Jake's rifle clattered to the floor as his hands began shaking. I remember the conference, your father, I was there. I saw what happened." The memory bond activated like a neural thunderclap, linking their biometrics and flooding both their consciousness with fragments of suppressed truth. Jake saw flashes of his younger self being hustled away by men in corporate security uniforms. His memories altered, his identity changed, his entire life rebuilt to hide him from people who wanted him dead. Kira experienced 20 years of believing her father died because peace was impossible, only to discover that peace had been murdered by people who profited from war. "You're him," she said, her voice barely audible. "You're the witness. You're the reason I've spent half my life believing humans betrayed us." "I'm the reason," Jake replied, memories flooding back like a broken dam. "That someone's been making billions of credits from keeping your people homeless." Around them, the station's communication systems began registering unusual biometric signatures, as the memory bond established permanent neural connections between two people who just remembered they were the key to unlocking 20 years of buried truth. And somewhere in the depths of space, automated surveillance systems detected the bond's activation and began sending alerts to corporate security forces who thought they'd buried the Meridian incident forever. Jake Morrison, who'd thought he was just a security analyst filing boring reports on empty space, was about to discover that some secrets are too big to stay buried, especially when the people who share them are finally brave enough to remember the truth. The memory bond hit like a neural earthquake, flooding Jake's consciousness with images that belonged to someone else's life, while his own suppressed memories erupted with 20 years of accumulated pressure. He staggered against the command console, overwhelmed by the dual sensation of remembering and being remembered. Jacob Morrison, age 12, son of colonial authority diplomat Richard Morrison, Kira said, her voice distant as she accessed memories that weren't originally hers. You were at the Meridian Peace Conference with your father. You were hiding behind the information booth when the shooting started. And you, Jake replied, his vision blurring as decades of hidden truth reassembled itself. You're Ambassador Thanery's daughter. You were supposed to be at that conference too, but you got sick and stayed home. I always wondered if things would have been different if I'd been there. Kira lowered her weapon completely, her storm gray eyes reflecting the same disorientation Jake felt. Now I know they would have been. They would have killed me too. Jake gripped the console harder as more memories surfaced. Corporate security forces finding him after the assassination. A man in an expensive suit explaining that his testimony would destabilize the peace process. Injections that made everything fuzzy. Waking up in a new home with new parents and a new name that felt wrong in his mouth. They didn't just hide me, he said, anger building as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. They rebuilt my entire identity. My parents, my education, my career. Everything was designed to keep me buried in places where I'd never be noticed. While I grew up believing your people had betrayed us, Kira replied bitterly. 20 years of hate based on a lie. The memory bond deepened as they shared their parallel experiences. Jake's life of careful isolation and routine assignments. Kira's training as an intelligence operative dedicated to finding the truth about her father's death. Both had been shaped by the same crime, their paths engineered to never cross until they chose to find each other. The assassination wasn't random, Jake said, accessing memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. I saw the shooter. Corporate security uniform, not Cathurian separatist gear. And the weapon, human manufacture, military grade. Meridian Defense Systems, Kira confirmed. The company that held arms contracts for both sides of the conflict. My investigation traced the weapon's serial number to their private security division. Jake pulled up current files on his workstation, his security clearance suddenly revealing connections he'd never noticed. Meridian Defense became Meridian Logistics after the war. They now hold exclusive contracts for refugee camp supplies, temporary housing, and transport coordination across 17 systems. Meaning they profit from keeping the refugee crisis unresolved. Meaning they've been profiting for 20 years from the crime we witnessed. Jake felt the memory bond's connection strengthening, allowing him to process Kira's investigative data alongside his own suppressed memories. Your father was negotiating permanent settlement agreements that would have ended the displacement crisis within 5 years. Meridian assassinated him to protect contracts worth trillions of credits. The station's communication array erupted with incoming signals, emergency transmissions, security alerts, and automated responses that suggested their memory bond had triggered alarms across multiple intelligence networks. Proximity alerts, Jake announced as his sensors detected ships dropping out of hyperspace. We've got 6 vessels approaching fast, 2 human configurations and 4 that I don't recognize. Corporate security and Cathurian intelligence, Kira said grimly. Both sides have been monitoring for memory bond activations related to the Meridian incident. They know we've found each other. How long do we have? Maybe 20 minutes before they dock. Maybe less if they decide boarding protocols are optional. Jake sealed the command center and activated the station's defensive systems. Mostly automated point defense and communication jamming that wouldn't stop determined attackers but might buy them time. We need to get this information out before they can suppress it again. Agreed. But transmission to where? Meridian has influence with both governments, and most media outlets won't touch classified material without official confirmation. Through their deepening bond, Jake felt Kira's tactical mind assessing options, while his analytical skills identified the data patterns they needed to exploit. What about direct transmission to refugee camps? If the displaced family know the truth about why they've been kept homeless for 20 years, they'll demand answers that even corporate influence can't suppress. Kira's eyes brightened with understanding, but we need irrefutable proof. Memory testimony alone won't be enough. We need documentation that corroborates our experiences. Jake accessed the station's deep archives, using his security clearance, and the memory bond's enhanced pattern recognition to search for files that had been buried but not destroyed. The original peace treaty negotiations. If Meridian sabotaged them, there should be evidence of corporate communication with the assassins. And financial records showing payment for the hit, Kira added, her intelligence training guiding their search. Professional assassinations leave paper trails if you know where to look. Working together, they found it. Encrypted communication logs showing Meridian executives coordinating with private security Jake looked at her, this remarkable woman who'd spent 20 years searching for truth about her father's death, who'd found him despite systems designed to keep them apart forever. Through their bond, he could feel her determination, her courage, and something deeper that made him want to be worthy of the trust she was placing in him. "Kira," he said quietly, "what if we don't survive this?" "Then at least the truth survives us," she replied. 20 years of silence is enough. The first docking clamps connected to the station's hull, with a metallic clang that echoed through the corridors. Outside the command center, they could hear the sounds of professional teams moving through the facility with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. "Broadcasting now," Jake announced as he initiated wide-spectrum transmission to refugee camps, media outlets, and government offices across human and Cathurian space. The truth about the Meridian incident, complete with evidence and witness testimony. As the data stream flowed out through quantum channels, Kira moved to the command center's secondary console. "I'm activating every emergency beacon in our combined networks. If they kill us, everyone will know who was responsible." The hatch began to glow as someone applied military-grade cutting tools from the other side. Jake felt the memory bond pulse with shared resolve. Two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, preparing to face the consequences of exposing truth that powerful forces had spent decades keeping buried. "Jake," Kira said as the cutting intensified, "whatever happens next, I want you to know, finding you was worth 20 years of searching." "Finding you," Jake replied, "was worth a lifetime of not knowing who I really was." The hatch exploded inward in a shower of sparks and molten metal, revealing armed figures in corporate security uniforms. But the transmission was already complete, carrying the truth about Ambassador Thanery's murder to every corner of civilized space. The memory bond pulsed between them, stronger than ever, as Jake Morrison and Kira Velshin prepared to discover whether love could indeed triumph over forces that had shaped their entire lives, or whether some truths were too dangerous for the people who shared them to survive. The corporate security team that breached the command center moved with the kind of professional precision that suggested they'd been planning this operation, since the memory bond alerts started screaming across their networks. 6 figures in advanced tactical gear, weapons trained with lethal competence, led by a woman whose expensive suit looked wildly out of place in a combat zone. "Mr. Morrison," the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to buying solutions to complicated problems. "I'm Director Sarah Chen, Meridian Logistics Security Division. You and Ms. Velshin have just committed acts of corporate espionage that threaten the stability of refugee assistance programs across 17 star systems." "Funny way of saying exposed your murder conspiracy," Jake replied, though he kept his hands visible and made no sudden movements. Through the memory bond, he could feel Kira calculating distances, weapon positions, and escape routes with the tactical efficiency of someone trained for exactly this situation. "The Meridian incident was a tragic failure of diplomacy," Director Chen continued, her tone suggesting she'd rehearsed this speech many times. "Dredging up conspiracy theories 20 years later serves no purpose except to destabilize carefully negotiated refugee assistance agreements. Agreements that keep millions of people homeless while your company profits from their misery," Kira said, her voice carrying dangerous undertones. My father died trying to give those people permanent homes. Your father died because peace negotiations collapsed under the weight of irreconcilable cultural differences. The archived records clearly show. The archived records clearly show corporate personnel coordinating an assassination, Jake interrupted, feeling his suppressed memories align with current evidence. I saw the shooter. Meridian uniform, human weapons, targeting the one person who could have ended the refugee crisis permanently. Director Chen's expression didn't change, but Jake caught the subtle hand signal she sent to her security team. I'm afraid you're both suffering from memory bond psychosis, a well-documented condition where shared neural links create false memories that seem authentic to the affected individuals. Memory bond psychosis, Kira repeated, her storm gray eyes reflecting amusement. Convenient diagnosis for people whose testimony threatens trillion-credit profit margins. The condition requires immediate medical intervention to prevent permanent psychological damage, Chen continued. We're here to provide assistance before your shared delusions become irreversible. Jake felt the memory bond pulse with shared understanding. Kira was right. They were about to be rescued by the same people who'd spent 20 years keeping the truth buried. But their transmission had already gone out, carrying evidence to refugee camps and media outlets across both civilizations. Director Chen, Jake said carefully, I'm curious about the timing. How did Meridian security teams happen to be in this sector, just when our memory bond activated? Corporate security maintains monitoring stations throughout the border regions. Refugee assistance requires constant vigilance against criminal elements who might exploit displaced populations. Criminal elements like the people who want to give refugees permanent homes, instead of keeping them dependent on corporate-controlled camps. Chen's professional composure finally cracked slightly. Mr. Morrison, your childhood trauma has clearly affected your ability to process complex political realities. Ambassador Thanery's death was investigated thoroughly by both governments. No evidence of corporate involvement was ever found. Because the primary witness was kidnapped, his memories altered, and his identity changed to prevent him from testifying, Kira said. Through their bond, Jake felt her coiled readiness. She was preparing to fight, and her tactical assessment suggested they might actually survive if they moved together. Ms. Velshin, your grief over your father's death is understandable, but constructing elaborate conspiracy theories. The conversation was interrupted by Jake's communication, array lighting up with incoming signals. Dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands as news of their broadcast spread through refugee networks faster than Meridian's damage control teams could suppress it. Refugee Camp 7 calling Outpost Gamma 7. Is the transmission authentic? Are we really looking at proof that Meridian murdered Ambassador Thanery? Luna Settlement requesting confirmation of corporate conspiracy evidence. Families here have been waiting 18 years for permanent housing. New Geneva Colony forwarding your broadcast to Galactic News Network. They want immediate interviews with both witnesses. Director Chen's expression grew dangerous. Shut down those communications immediately. Can't do that, Jake replied, though he didn't mention that the real reason was the memory bond's integration with the station's systems. Kira's intelligence training and his security clearance had somehow combined to give them access to communication protocols that even corporate security couldn't easily override. Freedom of information is protected under the Galactic Communications Act, not when that information threatens ongoing humanitarian operations. You mean threatens ongoing corporate profits, Kira corrected. The security team's leader stepped forward, weapon raised. Director, the broadcast is already viral across refugee networks. We need to contain the witnesses before this spreads to government channels. Jake felt Kira's tension spike through their bond as she prepared to move. Around them, The command center's automated systems were still processing incoming communications, creating enough background noise to mask the subtle sounds of people preparing for violence. "Director Chen," Jake said, his voice carrying more authority than he'd known he possessed, "you should know that our testimony includes more than just the ambassador's assassination. We've also documented how Meridian has been deliberately slowing refugee processing to maximize camp housing profits, bribing officials to maintain displacement policies, and intimidating families who have tried to organize independent settlement efforts. Those are serious allegations that require proper investigation through appropriate channels. The appropriate channels have been compromised by the same corporate interests we're exposing," Kira said. 20 years of investigation through proper channels is what got us here. The moment stretched between them, corporate security forces calculating the cost of violence versus the cost of exposure, while Jake and Kira shared tactical assessments through their deepening bond. Then the station's proximity alarms began screaming. "New contacts approaching," Jake announced, reading sensor data. 12 ships, mixed configuration, Cathurian intelligence, human diplomatic vessels, and Galactic News Network courier ships. Director Chen's expression went from professional annoyance to barely controlled panic. "Abort containment. Repeat, abort containment. Too many witnesses." "Ma'am, our orders." Our orders just became impossible to execute quietly. Chen holstered her weapon with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Morrison, Ms. Velshin, this conversation isn't over. Corporate security has long memories and extensive resources. Good thing refugee families have longer memories and more determination," Jake replied. As the security team withdrew, Jake felt Kira's relief mix with his own through their bond. They'd survived the immediate threat, but the real challenge was just beginning, proving their case to governments and media outlets while staying alive long enough to see justice done. "Kira," he said as the station's communication array continued broadcasting their story across civilized space, "what happens now?" "Now," she replied, her storm-gray eyes bright with determination, "we find out whether truth really is stronger than money, and whether two people with shared memories can change the course of galactic politics." Outside the command center's viewports, Jake could see the approaching ships, some coming to investigate, others to interview, still others to either support or suppress their revelations. The memory bond pulsed between them, carrying shared resolve and something deeper that made Jake believe they might actually succeed. After all, they'd already accomplished the impossible, finding each other across 20 years of separation and remembering truth that powerful forces thought they'd buried forever. Everything else was just details. The next 18 hours turned Outpost Gamma 7 from a forgotten border station into the most important location in human-Cathurian relations, as ships from both civilizations, media outlets, and independent investigation teams converged on coordinates that had been empty space in most official records. Jake found himself giving testimony to representatives from 47 different organizations, while the memory bond allowed him and Kira to coordinate their responses with uncanny precision. The assassination was executed by Meridian defense contractor Marcus Webb. Jake testified to the Joint Human-Cathurian Investigation Panel, his recovered memories providing details that 20 years of official investigation had missed. Serial number HN 7749, weapon registration traced to Meridian's private security arsenal. I saw him position himself 20 meters from Ambassador Thanery's speaking platform, then take the shot when security cameras were cycling between positions. Corroborating evidence confirms the witness's testimony, Kira added seamlessly, their shared bond allowing her to access not just Jake's memories, but the analytical patterns that made them meaningful. Meridian financial records show payment of 27 million credits to security consultation on the same day as the assassination, routed through 3 shell companies to contractor accounts. Admiral Richardson, representing the Human Investigation Team, reviewed the evidence with the expression of someone whose worst fears were being confirmed. If this testimony is accurate, it represents the largest corporate conspiracy in colonial authority history. The testimony is accurate, replied General Thanery, Kira's uncle and the current Cathurian military commander. Memory bond integration provides neurological verification that cannot be faked or falsified. These witnesses are sharing authentic experiences. Director Chen, representing Meridian's legal team, made one final attempt to control the narrative. The alleged memories could be the result of psychological trauma combining with memory bond psychosis to create detailed but false experiences. Without independent corroboration. We have independent corroboration, interrupted investigative journalist Alex Torres, whose news team had been following the story since Jake's initial broadcast. Meridian's archived communications, obtained through legal discovery, show executive-level discussions about neutralizing the peace process and maintaining market stability through extended conflict. The evidence was overwhelming, but Jake knew that corporate influence ran deep in both governments. Through his bond with Kira, he could feel her tactical mind calculating the political pressures that might still suppress their testimony or minimize its impact. That's when the refugees themselves changed everything. Outpost Gamma 7, this is Refugee Collective 7 calling for immediate broadcast time, came the transmission from one of the oldest displaced settlements. We represent 1.7 million Cathurians across 43 camps, and we demand to address the investigation panel directly. What followed was the most powerful testimony of the entire proceeding, not from government officials or corporate executives, but from families who had spent decades in temporary housing, while Meridian profited from their displacement. My daughter has lived her entire life in corporate-controlled camps, testified Elena Morshan, speaking for the collective. 24 years without a permanent home because the company managing our assistance makes more money keeping us dependent than helping us settle permanently. My grandfather fought in the border wars believing he was protecting our freedom, added another voice. He died never knowing that his sacrifice was being used to justify corporate profits. One by one, refugee representatives shared stories of deliberately delayed processing, artificially inflated housing costs, and bureaucratic obstacles that disappeared whenever families could afford Meridian's premium assistance packages. The pattern was clear. Corporate-controlled displacement had become more profitable than actual humanitarian aid. Director Chen, Admiral Richardson said after hours of refugee testimony, does Meridian Logistics have any response to these allegations? Chen's earlier confidence had evaporated under the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. Meridian Logistics maintains that all assistance operations have been conducted according to legal contracts negotiated with both governments. Contracts that were negotiated after your company assassinated the person most likely to resolve the refugee crisis permanently, Kira said, her voice carrying 20 years of controlled fury. Contracts that required continued displacement to remain profitable. The investigation will determine. The investigation is complete, General Thanery interrupted. The evidence is conclusive, the witnesses are verified, and the victim families have testified to decades of systematic exploitation. The only question now is what happens next. The answer came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours of the panel's preliminary findings, both governments issued emergency orders dissolving Meridian's refugee assistance contracts and authorizing immediate settlement operations under joint human-Cathurian oversight. Corporate executives were arrested across 12 star systems, while emergency resettlement teams began the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. 1.7 million refugees processed for permanent settlement within 90 days. Jake read from the official orders as he and Kira worked together to coordinate logistics, emergency housing construction, education placement, and economic integration support for every displaced family, plus establishment of the Morrison-Velschen Memorial Foundation for Refugee Assistance, Kira added, her voice soft with emotion. Named for the witnesses who exposed the conspiracy and the ambassador who died trying to prevent it. Their memory bond had evolved into something neither had expected, not just shared memories, but shared purpose that made them more effective together than either could be alone. Jake's analytical skills and security clearance combined with Kira's intelligence training and cultural knowledge to create an investigative partnership that had already uncovered 3 additional corporate conspiracies. You know what the strangest part is? Jake said as they reviewed settlement applications in their new joint office aboard the refugee coordination vessel New Meridian. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was just a security analyst filing boring reports on empty space. 3 weeks ago, I thought my father's death was a tragic symbol of failed diplomacy, Kira replied, her storm-gray eyes bright with hope that had been missing for 20 years. Now I know he died as a hero trying to save millions of people from exactly the situation we just ended. Jake looked at her, this remarkable woman who had searched for truth across impossible distances, who had found him despite systems designed to keep them apart forever, who had given him back not just his memories but his purpose. Kira, he said quietly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't broken into my station that night? Every day, she replied, reaching across to take his hand. The every day, she replied, reaching across to take his hand. The memory bond pulsed between them, warm and familiar now, carrying shared contentment alongside their determination. But then I remember that some connections are strong enough to transcend any obstacle, even 20 years of corporate conspiracy and memory suppression. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of Settlement New Haven, watching Cathurian children play in gardens tended by families from both species. The former refugee camp had been transformed into a thriving colony, where humans and Cathurians worked together to build something better than either civilization could create alone. The final settlement statistics came in today, Kira announced, joining him at the viewport with a data pad that showed numbers that still amazed them both. 17 million refugees successfully relocated to permanent homes, 0 families remaining in corporate-controlled camps, and average integration time reduced from years to weeks. Plus, Jake added, Meridian Logistics has been completely dissolved, their assets redistributed to victim compensation funds, and their executives are facing trial for conspiracy, murder, and crimes against humanity. The best part, Kira said with satisfaction, is that 3 other memorial foundations have been established using our model. Refugee assistance is now run by the people it's supposed to help instead of corporations that profit from their suffering. Jake felt their bond pulse with shared accomplishment. Through their partnership, they'd not only exposed the truth about Ambassador Thanery's murder, but transformed the entire approach to humanitarian assistance across multiple star systems. Their combined perspectives, his human analytical skills and her Cathurian cultural knowledge, had proven that cooperation could achieve what competition never could. Husband, Kira said, the title still making Jake smile after their formal bonding ceremony 3 months earlier. The Earth Council approved our proposal for expanded memory bond research. And the Cathurian Parliament voted to fund joint investigation teams for other unresolved conspiracies, Jake replied. Apparently, our success has convinced both governments that some bonds are worth encouraging. Through their viewport, they could see the New Meridian approaching the settlement's docking platform, carrying the latest group of families transitioning from temporary assistance to permanent homes. Each ship represented lives saved, families reunited, and futures made possible by people who'd been brave enough to remember truth that powerful forces wanted forgotten. You know what I've learned? Jake said, watching children who would grow up free from the displacement that had defined their parents' lives. Memory isn't just about the past, it's about making sure the future learns from what came before. And sometimes, Kira added, the most important memories are the ones we recover together. Jake looked at his wife, brilliant, determined, impossibly patient woman who had turned his meaningless existence into the most important work of his life. Through their bond, he could feel her love, her hope, and her absolute certainty that they'd chosen the right path despite all the dangers it had brought. "I came to that outpost thinking I was hiding from my past," he said quietly. "Instead, I found someone who helped me remember who I was always meant to be. We found each other,